Your second guest is the man who helps your kettle turn off once it's boiled, and the man behind the huge gold clocks which exist here now, 2 in Cambridgeshire, which are a thing of beauty, quite pricey as well, but an incredible story and a remarkable one about evading U-boats when he was just 3 years old. His father, who was a war hero, Dr. John Taylor, your next guest here on Lunchtime Live.
Across Cambridgeshire.
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
It's gone 20 minutes past 12. Your second guest this afternoon is inventor Dr. John Taylor. This is a man with 400 patents to his name, one of which is the small thermostatic switch in your kettle which turns it off once the water has boiled. Otherwise, you just have to sit there and watch it and turn it off once you see it bubbling away. Well, he was back in Cambridgeshire just over a week ago to unveil the second huge golden clock that the county and the city of Cambridge has to boast. The second clock with a grotesque beast crawling over the top of it, or a chronophage as it is called. The second one, it's a great blue thing on top of a gold clock, is at the Line Yard in Cambridge. But the first one, several years back now, is the one at Corpus Christi College in Cambridge, where he was a student, and which, if you've seen it, you'll know stops traffic in its tracks, and also pretty much every tourist that ever comes to the city.
Absolutely, it's changed the centre of Cambridge in that the chief attraction used to be King's College Chapel, and people used to stand on that corner with their backs to Corpus and look at King's College Chapel. Now they get in the road, turn round with their backs to King's College Chapel to look at the chronophage on Corpus.
Do you know how Kings feel about that? Are you barred?
I haven't asked.
Describe, a lot of people will have seen it, but for those who haven't seen the Corpus clock, the Midsummer one is very similar apart from the beast you described, but describe to us the Corpus clock.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm an inventor, so I don't want to do anything that anybody else has done before. And basically, clocks are boring. You just glance at them and you can tell the time, because everybody knows the way the minute hand goes around. You're taught at school how to tell the time and how the hour hand moves, and you only have to glance at it and you know what the time is. Or it's a digital clock and it gives you the numbers. So the clocks are boring. They're just on the wall. You just glance at them. I wanted a clock which interacted with you, and so that the clock itself has time racing away round the dial. So instead of having hands that move, the lights move, and the seconds are on the outside, and instead of moving from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they race round all the way, all the numbers, and then pause, and then race off again. So time is racing away, and I wanted to depict that visually to the observer. And then the next line of lights is the minutes, and then the inner line is the hours.
And is it three concentric circles of blue lights that go around a huge undulating gold disc, which is how big is that, John?
It's 1.5 meters in diameter, 4'6" in the old money, and the idea is that time must have started sometime, and most astronomers tell us that it all started with the Big Bang. So time then went as a wave out through the universe. So the face of the clock is undulating like the ripples on a pond going out throughout the universe.
With his chronophage on the top, which is about the size of a Labrador, isn't it?
Bit bigger than, yes, it's a bit. It's generally not as heavy as a Labrador. But
and you mentioned the big, because I remember when we spoke about this. This has always stuck with me. It's incredible how you created the undulating effect on the face of the gold clock. Tell us how you managed that.
Well, it's an explosive forming. I was trying to do it myself, and then I thought, well, I'm not 21 again, I'm in my 70s, and perhaps health and safety wouldn't like me making explosions. But I found that there was an organisation in the Netherlands who actually use this technique, and they've made all the faces of the chronophages underwater with an explosion.
And so, describe it to us then. Is it you get a sheet of of gold, do you?
No, it's actually stainless steel. Rewinding slightly, everything in Cambridge has to last for hundreds of years, so you can't use plastic because nobody knows what's going to happen to it eventually, and you can't use paint because it fades, and so you need to have a natural material. Well, the most durable natural material is gold. It's a bit expensive to have thick sheets of it, so the stainless steel is underneath it, and then with the gold on top, it will retain that look for thousands of years.
But you place the explosive on top then of the sheet metal which is underwater?
Yes, the explosion is in the middle of a column of water, so when the bang goes off, the water above the explosion is blown up in the air, but Newton's law, equal and opposite force coming down, so there's the hydraulic thump of the water coming down, which actually forms the sheet up against a mould.
And did that happen under the Swiss Alps? Did I remember that correctly?
No, that's the CERN. That's electrons being accelerated round.
I invented this. This is for dinner parties. I invented it happens in a evil Bond villain style layer under the Swiss Alps.
No, not quite. No, it was in the Netherlands.
Wonderful. So there's 4 in existence,
yes,
that you mentioned. So we will have 2 in Cambridgeshire,
yes,
over the summer. Where are the other 2 then exactly? One in America, you say?
One's in America in a private collection, and the dragon is in my home in the Isle of Man.
Okay. And are they for sale?
Yes. I got my order book here if you'd like to give your name.
Dare I ask how much it might set me back, roughly?
If you want a standard clock, 2 to 2.5 million. If you want your own individual creature performing as you would like it to move, then you're talking about 3 million.
Okay. Will you accept monthly direct debits?
Definitely, yes.
Over the next 1,000 years?
Even better.
Are you still inventing, John?
Of course. If you're an inventor, you can't stop inventing. It's amazing when I pick anything up, I wonder how it's been made. And it's so many things that you have these days that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and they're not properly designed. And people just perpetuate what's been done in the past because people expect it to look like that, but it doesn't mean to say it's fit for purpose.
I always marvel at that. I kind of imagine we've got to a point in our existence where there's nothing left to invent, really. I mean, science fiction has told us what things in the future might look like, but we're almost, like you say, sort of programmed to expect things to look the way that they are. But that's what sets apart an inventor's brain from others.
There was nothing wrong with the early electric kettles. They boiled water. You had to switch them off when they boiled. But why not do it automatically? And so I designed controls for electric kettles which switch off when they boil. Then there's nothing wrong with a plug in the back of a kettle, but it would be easier if you could just have it on a little base and pick it up. There's nothing wrong with having a little base that you put the kettle down, but you have to orientate the early ones, whereas why not make it a 360 degree, so you can just put it down, left hand or right hand, pick it up, and you don't have to orientate it. So it's you want to do something new all the time. That's what moves life forward.
Do we have you to thank for the base as well? I knew we had you to thank for our kettles not continually boiling, but yes, the base as well.
Yes, the first cordless bases, yes.
In every single kettle in the world.
Well, of course, the patents run out, and then the ideas are copied.
John Taylor, your guest this afternoon here on Lunchtime Live, BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. He's currently designing, or has rather designed, it's not been released yet, a coffee cup, because he's lost his grip strength as he's got older, and he's completely redesigned the cup. Apparently it's going to blow your mind, and I just don't get how you can look at that and think, do you know what, that actually doesn't work. I can do better than that. It's a coffee cup. They've looked the same for years. And I worked out the direct debit because I threw that out there quite quickly. If you were to pay off £3 million over 1,000 years, it would still, assuming it was at 0% interest, cost you £250 a month in direct debits. So it's still a bit steep. John's story is an incredible one and starts at a very young age and also starts boot north.
Yes, Derbyshire born, Derbyshire bred, strong at farm and thick at fed. But as a young child, I got eczema, and I'm discovered 20 years later I'm also dyslexic. Words are very difficult to read in capital letters because you'd never see them in capital letters. So when you behind you you've got in capital letters BBC Cambridgeshire, it's much harder to read in capital letters than in lowercase. And so all motorway signs are in lowercase because you always see Cambridge written in lowercase. It's only the exception that people think it's clearer to put it in capital letters. Well, for people like me, it's difficult to read.
And of course, we're very hot on picking that sort of thing up in this day and age. But was it picked up when you were a child?
No, not until I was middle age.
Yeah.
Yes, I. In my school days, my headmaster in King William's College in the Isle of Man said that I was either lazy or thick or both.
And how did that affect you? Did you take it to heart?
Well, you know that you're doing your best, and if you're doing your best, nobody can do more than that. And so that it doesn't affect your life, but you can't understand how people can't understand that you can't understand what it's all about.
And then what took you to Canada?
The war, when World War II broke out and the disaster of the defeat of the British Expeditionary Force and then the retreat from Dunkirk, it was very likely that England would be overrun and defeated. And my father had some of his patents being used by the RAF in the suits that were for the bomber crew to keep them warm at altitude, the electrically heated suits. And the same suits were made for the Canadian Royal Air Force. And so that my father phoned up his friend in Canada and said, will you look after my wife and children during the war, so that if we are overrun, at least they're going to have some freedom. And that's what happened. So.
And how old were you at the time?
3.
Okay, so no, you've been told this, or do you have any memory of this?
Oh, very much so. It's very strong, my first memory. At the age of 3, if I can put my teeth back in, my father shook me by the hand, looking down at me from his 6-foot height. So I was 3 years old. And he said, you will look after Mummy for me, won't you? And that edict has been with me the whole of my life. And I can remember it, the horror of the thought at the time. How do I do this? So that, yes, that's my first memory at the dockside with all the people and the liner about to sail.
And you were there for 6 years before returning after the war?
No, we actually came back in the beginning of 1945 after the invasion of D-Day, which we'd just been celebrating. At Christmas time, my father came over and we sailed back from Halifax, Nova Scotia in a convoy, and 5 of the ships in the convoy were sunk by this submarine. And I can vividly remember the corvettes chasing around, throwing depth charges into the sea, and huge mounds of, like a geyser, blown up into the sky. And they couldn't kill the submarine. And it was a new version that nobody knew anything about. And whereas submarines normally could only go down because the pressure to sort of 350 feet. This was a new version, extra strong, and could go down to 600 feet. So all the depth charges blowing up at 350 feet where they thought it would be. Of course, they damaged the U-boat, but they didn't kill it. And it took the rest of the war for it to limp back to Germany. Yeah, so it's all great fun when you're a small boy.
Well, I mean, the war was also a time of great engineering ingenuity, wasn't it? Was your interest ignited in some way from that experience?
Well, of course, my father designed all the electrically heated clothing and then needed a thermostat towards the end of the war. The existing thermostats all had arcs and went bzz, bzz, which was a radio signal. And that's one of the reasons why in the war the brave Americans flew during the day, whereas they, as according to Hollywood, the British skulked around at night. The reason you've only got to go up to Madingley and see that during the day the losses for the Americans were enormous. And at night, with having thermostats, the German night fighters could home in on the bombers, and the bombers couldn't see them, but they could see the red-hot exhaust pipes, even on a starlit night, no moon, and shoot them down. So they were just like sitting ducks on a pond. And so that's one of the reasons why the suits in the RAF didn't give off the radio signals, and so until radar was invented right at the end of the war, it was chance if the bomber got caught in a searchlight or met up with a night fighter. But the Americans announced their presence with all this radio noise coming out, and the night fighters used to just home in on the noise and then see the bombers and shoot them down.
You're obviously immensely proud of your father's achievement.
Yes, well, he was awarded £100,000 for his services to the saving lives during the war. And Frank Whittle was awarded the same for developing the jet engine.
Did he stretch to more than a handshake when he welcomed you back?
Well, he did come and travel back with us on the boat, so it's a funny feeling when you're a young lad and you've heard all these stories about your father who's single-handed with one hand tied behind his back, taking on the whole of the Nazi war machine. It's quite difficult then to see him as a human being.
Quite a shadow to live in as well.
Yes.
So did that help sort of inspire you to achieve greater things?
Well, I used to think that all fathers were inventors, so I took it completely for granted that I would be an inventor. Why wouldn't anybody be an inventor? If you see something and have a good idea, then that's an invention. Most people have plenty of good ideas, but they don't do anything about it. Then you've got to follow your dream and make it come true, and that's then is a company and it's employment and creativity, and that's the fun in life.
And there's a certain amount of bravery, risk-taking, acceptance of potential loss.
No, because you never believe there will be any risk-taking or loss. If you believe in what you're doing, you do it, and you know it's going to come through in the end.
John, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for sharing your story this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Dr. John Taylor OBE, who popped into the studio just over a week ago when he was unveiling the Midsummer Clock. It is another huge golden clock with a beast crawling over the top of it. This latest one is here just for the summer in the Lion Yard in Cambridge, but his original one is the Corpus Clock, which is in Cambridge opposite King's College, and is a real crowd stopper, which you'll know if you've spotted it. All tourists stop and stand in the road. You can't get past it. But a remarkable man, the man who also invented the switch that turns your kettle off once it's boiled. My thanks to him for joining us here on Lunchtime Live. It's time for another update on the road and rail news now.
Across Cambridgeshire.
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.